The old bells of St. Irenaeus Church echoed across the mist-covered valley as Father Marcus arrived. Newly ordained and eager, he had been assigned to the secluded European village with little explanation. The locals, hunched with age and whispers, greeted him with polite nods but avoided his gaze. The church loomed above the town like a stone guardian, ancient, cracked, and utterly silent. Inside, the air was heavy. Centuries of incense, dust, and secrets soaked the wooden pews and stained glass windows. Marcus admired the altar, though something about it felt off. Its base was unusually wide, and the crucifix above it seemed almost too pristine. Still, he was determined to bring life back into the old place. Sermons, hymns, community. Days passed. Marcus prayed, preached to empty seats, and explored. One afternoon, while inspecting the altar for repairs, he noticed a slight draft brushing his ankles. Curious, he cleared the dusty floor and discovered a faint seam, the outline of a trapdoor. The hinges were sealed shut with thick, blackened chains, and strange symbols had been etched around the edge, their shapes foreign and almost painful to look at. That night, he asked the church's elderly caretaker, Elias, about it. "That door," Elias muttered, eyes flicking nervously toward the altar, "was never meant to be opened. Sealed by holy wax. Locked by vow. Let it be." But curiosity grew. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something beneath called to him, soft as breath, constant as heartbeat. He returned with bolt cutters, sweat beading on his brow as the metal chains snapped one by one. The final lock gave way with a metallic shriek, and the trapdoor creaked open, exhaling the breath of rot and silence from below. He descended with a lantern, the steps winding down like the throat of a giant beast. The air grew colder, wetter, denser. The stone walls were damp with moss and handprints, long, dragging handprints that trailed downward. After several minutes, he reached the bottom. A stone corridor stretched ahead, its ceiling arched with ancient brickwork. The walls bore crude religious carvings, not in Latin or Greek, but something far older, symbols that looked carved in agony. The floor was smeared in something dark that flaked beneath his feet, not dirt, but old blood, dried, thick and layered. At the end of the corridor stood a great wooden door, swollen and cracked with age. Marcus pushed it open, and his lantern light spilled into a vast underground hall. Pillars lined the room like ribs of a buried giant. At the far end sat an altar made of bone, not marble or stone, actual human bone, bleached and carved into sacred symbols. Candles, long melted, clung to the walls like waxen tears. He stepped forward, breath fogging the cold, dead air. Something moved behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Just the echo of his own breath and the slow, rhythmic sound of water dripping from the ceiling. On the floor, faint markings had been scratched around the altar, a circular pattern with dozens of names. His name wasn't there. Yet, as he examined the markings, a distant sound echoed through the hall. Faint, rhythmic, wet. Footsteps? No, more like crawling. Suddenly, the lantern flickered violently, casting shadows like flailing limbs. He turned to leave, but the way back felt longer now, darker, heavier, as if the walls themselves shifted when he wasn't looking. A final glance behind him revealed something he hadn't noticed before, a phrase carved deep into the altar, as though etched by trembling hands. They do not rest. They only wait. Marcus fled the basement. The trapdoor slammed shut behind him on its own. Back in the sanctuary, he fell to his knees in front of the altar, breathing hard, soaked in fear. He didn't speak of it the next day. Not to Elias, not to the villagers. But the whispers had already begun. The old women stopped smiling at him, and the men wouldn't make eye contact. And from that night on, every time Marcus approached the altar, he heard a sound from below, a soft clink, like cutlery on porcelain. For days after opening the trapdoor, Father Marcus felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back. The church seemed colder. Shadows clung to corners longer than they should. The villagers had grown eerily silent. Even Elias, the caretaker, had disappeared. His room in the rectory abandoned, bed still warm, a teacup on the nightstand half full. Marcus barely slept. Each night, he heard faint noises from beneath the altar, Not just creaks or groans of old stone, but movement, shuffling, soft laughter, and always the clink of utensils on plates. One evening, unable to bear the curiosity and dread, Marcus descended again, armed with only a lantern and the Book of Psalms. The air in the stairwell was thicker now, like breathing through soaked cloth. The deeper he went, the more time felt suspended. His watch stopped ticking, and his steps seemed to echo out of rhythm with his motion. At the bottom, the hallway was different. The symbols on the walls were glowing faintly, not brightly, but with the faint pulse of dying embers. The door at the end of the corridor, which had once resisted his push, now stood slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. He stepped through and froze. What lay beyond was not just a stone chamber, but a hidden chapel, grand, cavernous, and perfectly preserved. Wooden pews sat in neat rows, all facing an ornate altar made of cracked marble and something else. Embedded in the base were human teeth. But it wasn't the altar that made Marcus's breath catch. It was the congregation. Dozens of figures filled the pews, men, women, even children, all seated, all dressed in antique garments. Dusty suits, moth-eaten dresses, veils, hats. But they were dead, clearly dead, yet perfectly preserved. Their skin, pale and waxy, was stretched tight over their bones, lips curled into grotesque, frozen smiles. Their eyes, wide open, stared at the altar with eternal focus, as if waiting for sermon. Or a meal. Marcus staggered back, bile rising in his throat. These weren't ordinary corpses. Their posture, their expressions, they weren't buried and forgotten. They were waiting. At the center of the room stood a long dining table. It was dark and cracked with age. It was set for a feast. Golden goblets, silverware crusted in old blood, plates of long rotten meat, and chalices filled with something black and congealed. One place at the table remained clean, a chair drawn back, a silver plate polished and empty. It was meant for someone. On the wall beside the altar hung a tattered scroll, written in both Latin and a twisted language that hurt to look at. Marcus could only read fragments of the Latin translation. Let them dine, for they slept long. The hallowed do not decay, for they have been fed. We offer the living, so the dead remain grateful. He who wears the cloth shall bring the feast. A realization clawed its way into Marcus's mind. They weren't just dead parishioners. They were offerings former priests, villagers, entire families, preserved not by miracle or nature, but by ritual. This was the feast the church had kept secret, not symbolic, not metaphorical, but literal. As he turned to flee, a soft sound stopped him cold, a slow creak, wood against stone. He turned his lantern toward the pews, and saw a woman in the front row slowly turning her head toward him. Her neck cracked like dry wood, and her eyes locked with his. Her smile widened. Another corpse twitched. A hand slid across the back of a pew. One by one, the congregation began to stir, heads rotating, spines straightening. Their mouths opened wider, revealing black tongues and broken teeth. Marcus stumbled backward, lantern shaking in his grip. As the room came alive with the grotesque motions of the dead, a sound echoed from the back of the chapel, a bell tolling. Once, twice, thrice. The feast was beginning. Marcus ran. He sprinted to the corridor, up the spiral staircase, gasping for breath as the sounds of dragging footsteps and inhuman whispering rose behind him. As he reached the sanctuary above, the trapdoor slammed shut on its own, sealing him out or sealing them in. For now, he collapsed at the altar, heart pounding, sweat mixing with tears. Morning light bled through the stained glass, but it felt like nothing had changed. He had seen them, and they had seen him. Father Marcus couldn't escape the image of the church beneath the altar, the underground chapel, the starved congregation, and the feast laid out for them. The more he tried to forget, the more it consumed him. The silence in the church was deafening, oppressive. No more voices, no more prayer, no more sound except for his own breath and the quiet rustling of the wind outside. The bell tolled again. Every night at midnight, it rang. Even if Marcus shut his eyes tight, buried his head beneath his pillow, the ringing would slice through the darkness like a dagger. The dead were waiting. And it wasn't just in the basement. The feeling of being watched never left him. The congregation had risen from their seats, and now their eyes followed him everywhere. In the mirrors, the stained glass, even the shadows cast by the flickering candles. Days blended into nights, and Marcus felt as though the walls were closing in. His faith wavered. His confidence eroded. It wasn't just a fear of the dead that gripped him. It was a growing certainty that he was a part of something far darker than he could understand. The villagers, though they had always been quiet, now looked at him with a sense of anticipation. They never spoke to him, but their faces seemed too patient, too knowing. It was as if they expected him to fulfill a role, and he was starting to realize with cold horror that they had been waiting for him to realize what that role was. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in the rectory, contemplating his options, a knock echoed at the door. He opened it to find the oldest woman of the village, her skin wrinkled like parchment, her eyes two hollow voids. "Father," she said in a voice that was soft but eerily clear, "it's time." For the first time since arriving, Marcus felt fear rise in his chest like a wave. He took a step back, instinctively pulling the door closer to him. I don't understand," he stammered. "Do you know why you were sent here?" she asked, her tone growing gentler but more insistent. "Do you know why this church was built? Do you understand why the bell tolls?" Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He knew, deep down, that his questioning was too late. They had already decided for him. The woman's voice softened, almost sympathetic. "You were sent to be the feast." Marcus felt his knees give way, but she caught him with surprising strength. Her gnarled fingers dug into his arm, dragging him toward the door. "Come, you have been chosen." The truth hit him like a fist to the chest. For generations, the church had been performing a dark ritual, a twisted covenant with something far older than Christianity itself. Every priest sent here was not meant to save the people. He wasn't here to guide them or offer salvation. No, his role was far more sinister. He was a living sacrament, the offering. For centuries, the church had fed its dead congregation, and now it was his turn. The woman led him down to the church's lower levels, past a familiar stone corridor and into the chapel beneath the earth. His legs trembled with each step, the weight of his realization sinking deeper with every breath. The altar, once a grotesque monument to something forgotten, was now gleaming in its eerie sanctity. The starved, hollow-eyed congregation sat in their pews, their heads tilted toward him as he entered. Their smiles widened, a grotesque parody of joy. A low, guttural murmur of anticipation filled the room, the dead and the living in perfect synchrony. As the woman guided him to the altar, the villagers gathered, standing in a circle around him, chanting softly in a language that felt like sandpaper against his soul. He tried to move, to fight, but his body refused to obey. The feast had begun. The long dining table was set once again. The plates were pristine, the utensils shining like weapons. A goblet filled with dark, congealing liquid stood before him, waiting. There was only one empty seat at the table. His. The woman placed her hands on his shoulders, pushing him down. The village elders, silent and unblinking, began to chant louder now. The room seemed to warp and shift around him, the walls pulsating like the beating of a heart. Father Marcus was no longer a priest. He was no longer a man. He was a sacrifice, the living sacrament. And as the villagers closed in, his scream was swallowed by the abyss, the same abyss that had claimed so many before him.